Well, very good evening to everybody. It's a Tuesday evening. It's the 19th of May. And yes, we still remain in lockdown. Conversations from lockdown brought to you, and we're glad to say we do have a new sponsor on board, and it's a very good evening. And a warm welcome to our new sponsor, Mumpro SA and I4 Williams Trailers. Great to have you guys on board, and of course, in association with Kyalami Equestrian Park. Well, my guest this evening has been in the horse business for a long time now, is part of the institution. He's a breeder, Capital Stud, Mr. Henning Pretorius. Good evening, how are you?
Hi, Aiden. I'm very well, thanks. And you?
Yeah, well, we're going a little bit stir crazy. It's crazy times, crazy world out there.
Yeah, it's a challenge, eh?
Yeah, we'll get through it. We'll get through it. Henning, first of all, everybody knows that there's this new acquisition of Summerhill Stud. We'll get to that a little bit later in the program. But first of all, where are you? Are you down on the farm? Are you in Joburg? Or?
I'm in Northwest at the moment, attending some business down here, and we'll be going down in the next couple of days.
Now, I imagine the life of a farmer continues pretty much uninterrupted, securing food security and all that. Have you guys had any interruptions, or are you guys continuing as per usual?
We continue as per usual. We are very privileged to be able to do that. You know, firstly, it doesn't interrupt our business. And secondly, we're free to move, obviously, with certain restrictions, but you know, if I think about other people that are locked in a small apartment with children, it really, it breaks my heart to think of those kids and people losing their jobs and all that. So yes, we are privileged to be in this position.
Right. Well, our viewers know about Capital Stud. They obviously see you at all the shows. You're a huge part of the fabric of show jumping in South Africa. But I'm not sure anybody, and I don't know where it all began, why this big passion for horses, how you're involved. So we want to go back there. But a good friend of mine, and I don't know if he was pulling my leg, a mutual friend who sadly is no longer with us, Kevin Connolly, told me many years ago, and like I say, I don't know if he was just trying to pull my leg, but that you have direct lineage to the great trek boer Henning Pretorius. Was he pulling my leg?
No. My name goes back to Andries's brother. There were three brothers that moved to this area specifically. It was Andries and his two brothers, Bart and Henning. And that's where my names come from.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah,
sure.
He was head of the artillery, and he was also HPN.
So what is that? Like a great grandfather, uncle?
Actually, I don't know.
Okay. we'll have to look it up. I'll get back to you. But let's go back to my former question now. Where did it start with horses for you? Where this big passion for the show jumper?
You know, horses is something that's in your blood. And I think everybody knows that. It's something that you either have or you don't have. And it's always been my passion. Horses have been my passion my whole life. And whenever there was an opportunity to get involved with horses, you know, I was there. So it started many years ago. I actually rode at some stage myself, competed. It was very difficult because I didn't have the means to do it. But you know, in the early days, we didn't have warm bloods. It was the Thoroughbreds, and I'm not talking about the talented horses that Annalie and those people rode. It was the horses that we could get hold of, because it's always been an expensive hobby, and you needed to be able to afford it. So it's always been there.
So you say you did ride and compete at one stage as well. What sort of level? Was it pleasure riding, or were you making your way up the grades?
I don't know, I think I made it up to C grade at the time. And I was very dependent on Denton Sanders those years. It was just after they moved down from Zambia, and he had a place. He had a yard on the Cullinan Road. It later became Sandine Stud Farm, but at the time he was actually living with his parents, and I stabled 2 horses with him then. And he used to assist me and help me to get to shows in those days. I'm talking many, many years ago. It must have been, it must have been in the 70s.
Okay. And your foray into breeding, take us back, the history of the farm before the stud. How long were you there before the stud? And I'm talking about Hartbeespoort now, the Hickpoort area. How long were you at that farm farming before you decided to turn your hand to breeding of horses?
I've been in this area my whole life. I was born here and I grew up here. And I started my farming career here. So during the years when I started farming, I didn't have the time to attend to any horses because I had to work hard to make a living. And the breeding started at some stage when I acquired a few broodpad. It was actually the Cape broodpad horses at a sale at Onderstepoort. But the big challenge with the South African breeds is the fact that they're very small. There's some very nice breeds in South Africa, but they're small and they're very limited in their abilities. And then I was introduced to the warm blood. Those days everybody was talking about a Hanoverian. There wasn't, the term warm blood didn't exist. So everybody was talking about a Hanoverian and a Trakehner. Actually, we knew about Trakehners and Hanoverians before we learned about warm bloods. And that was the ideal horse in terms of size and ability to introduce to our breeding in South Africa, especially later on the thoroughbred mares. And that's how it all started there.
When you say you were introduced to the warm blood, tell me that story. Who introduced you? Was it, were you overseas? Was it here? Was it the days when the first kind of warm bloods, Hanoverians started coming into the country? I think Peter Lavore introduced a few, Saulus and those big buggers.
The first person that introduced me to warm bloods was Helen Bean at the time. She had a few warm bloods. And that's where I learned about the warm bloods the first time. And then I met other people in the industry, Linda Rabi. She, again, introduced me to Dirk Zagers at the time. And I actually got on a plane and I flew to Belgium. And I met Dirk there for the first time. And he took me around to look at some stallions. The first stallion that I looked at was a Grand Veneer stallion, which I didn't quite like. And then he took me to Paul May, to Van der Hellestad, where I saw several stallions. And that's actually where Ulior comes from. That was one of the first stallions that I imported. He was standing there as a 2-year-old. And Dirk was the one that convinced me to buy him. Yeah, and from there on, the whole process grew. I bought a whole lot of mares at an auction. It was in Potchefstroom. The army was at the time having a sale, and there were a few old warm blood mares from Namibia and quite a few thoroughbreds that were on the sale. And from those horses, actually, there was only one stallion at the time, warm blood stallion, and that was Ribaldor. So they were all covered by Ribaldor. And Rafika Dor, that's where he comes from, and he eventually won the World Cup. He did well in the Derby, and he was actually a very successful horse. So he was a cross between Ribaldor and the thoroughbred mare at the time. Okay. And that's where it all started.
Now, we're talking, what, 25 years ago?
Ulior was born in 97, so was Capriccio. So it was It was around about 2000, eh?
Yeah.
They were 2.5-year-olds at the time.
Okay. Now, Henning, did you envision at that stage that that you would grow, that the stud would grow to the size that it would? Did you have the vision for Capital Stud of where it is today back in those days, or were you just dabbling and having some fun, and so it went from strength to strength?
When you talk about breeding those days, I absolutely didn't have a clue where I was going and what would eventually happen. If I look back now, I definitely did not even nearly have a clue where we would all end up at the time.
Mm. Just more that you enjoyed the sport, you enjoyed the horses, you'd breed a few, and so the bug bit, and so the knowledge grew. Tell me about the knowledge. When you say you didn't have a clue, you obviously now very definitely do have a clue. So that evolution that you had to go and find out, take me through that process. Whose brains were you picking? What books were you reading? How did you acquire this knowledge that you have today?
I think that is the biggest satisfaction in this whole process. Learning about breeding, realizing that one had a need to know more. So ultimately, you've got riders that enjoys riding and competing. Then on the other hand, we as breeders, that's our challenge is to know more and to acquire the necessary bloodlines. So ultimately, originally, the idea was to acquire a proper stallion. Then after that was the fact that one actually needed to breed from better mares. And then there was the need to learn about better dam lines. And that was the biggest challenge. And it's still the biggest challenge. At the time, we knew about warm bloods and we knew about thoroughbreds. So in the thoroughbred breeding, I think there's very, very, very clear breeding lines that were successful in the past. To find out or to learn about dam lines in the rest of the world in the warm blood industry, you had to do a lot of research. Luckily today we have horse teleps and we have Upamondo and those tools to help you, and it's actually very, very easy these days, if you know what you're doing, to know which are the better dam lines. So the interesting thing is, at the time I was talking to Paul May from Van Hellenstad. It was many, many years ago. And he was the one that said to me, one thing I need to remember, when you breed, you've got to remember that apples comes from an apple tree. He actually said, under an apple tree you find apples. And that's an expression that I will never ever forget in my life. So if you look at breeding today, you've got all the successful stallions on the index. So very, very easy to select the better stallions. There are various successful dam lines. It's a little bit more difficult to identify them, because if you look at specific dam lines, that you will find within that dam line are certain dams that are successful and others that aren't, with exactly the same breeding. So it's not about this one's sister or that one's full sister, or it's about finding and identifying the specific mare that produces the best horses. And that is the challenge, to find those mares and then to actually find out which is the best stallions to suit those mares. Today, those days when I started Hanover, was a strong breeding association, but the more successful verband those days were the Holsteiners, and they were actually the horses that I liked the most. At the time, it was Cassini and Contender and Caratino and Corrado, and those were awesome stallions. Today, they're all old-fashioned, but they still play a major role in breeding. But it was a fantastic experience to go to these stallion selections, to experience the vibe that existed at these selections. Everybody that was there for one reason, and that was to see the best, new, latest stallions, up-and-coming stallions, being put through their paces and being selected. It was a fantastic vibe. You know, you had the Holsteiner selection that was the most exciting for me, and then you had Hanoverian and the Dutch selection. In later years, we started looking at Belgium and France. But those days, Holstein was very much in the lead in terms of breeding best show jumpers. And then, then came the dam lines. And again, there's some fantastic dam lines all over the world. But the majority of those days that I was aware of were the Holsteiners. Today, we are looking at other countries, especially Belgium. Belgium currently has a lot of very, very exciting dam lines, very, very successful. You look at Usha van Roosacker, Koelichin, Fregans de Chalus, the Bella from Sombeke. Those mares have produced many, many, many very, very, very successful show jumpers. Originally, I started with the older breeding lines, the Cassinis, and Darko is also something that today is old-fashioned, but still provides a lot of quality in the breeding. Contender, Caratino, Corrado, you name them. They're still there. They're a little bit in the background, but everywhere where you find them in the dam or whatever, you can recognize the quality that they contribute to the breeding. It's not like everything has changed, but there's a few lines that were added, and a few stallions at the time when they were selected were not recognized. And Heartbreaker is one of them. Heartbreaker was a stallion that was not, I was told by a breeder from Holland, approved in Holland because of the semen quality. The Belgians didn't care about semen quality, and they used him a lot more than I think he was used in Holland. And therefore, today you find a lot of horses in Belgium that has Heartbreaker blood in them, and that contributes to the quality of the horse that we're looking for these days. And there's many other stallions that you can mention in this regard. So this is all part of the breeding process, how things have evolved and developed over the years, and one had to keep up with it. It's not like it was a difficult thing, because it's such an interesting subject and it's such an exciting exercise. It was easy to keep up with this, and every year we look forward to the new crop of stallions that were selected, and keep track of the performing lines out of the different dam lines. And that's what breeding is all about. Is being involved in this process and being part of this process. And that's why, that's my biggest motivation. And that's why I'm doing what I'm doing today. And we have our own stallions, but we have access to the better semen in the world. But the challenge is every year and continuously to work out or to identify the new new or the latest performing lines that will determine the future show jumpers. And that is the core of breeding, you know, and the interest and the challenge and the excitement.
You've obviously imported many stallions in over the years, but getting back to the dams and the importance of the dams, have you imported a lot of your mares, or are still a lot of your mares that you run South African bred, South African raised? And how important is it when you say identifying those top dam lines to get your hands physically on them overseas and acquire them? Where do you go to do that? How much competition is there? I mean, what does it take to bring in those best dam lines?
In the early days, it was very difficult to get hold of the better dam lines. Breeders wouldn't let go of them, and there were certain breeders that would protect those dam lines and keep control of them for many years. But through embryo transfers and lately ICSI, that whole thing has exploded. Absolutely exploded. There are thousands of embryos lying in containers waiting to be put into surrogates, taken from these top dam lines. But in the early days, it was very difficult. You know, you had to travel thousands of kilometers through Europe to find the mare that you ultimately wanted. And I have spent a lot of time traveling through Europe looking for the better mares. But most of the times, if a breeder owned a good mare, that would be the last thing he would let go of. So it was difficult. But what I did is I bought foals. The only way that I could get my hands on these better lines was to buy foals from breeders and from auctions, from these different dam lines. And that's how I established my whole herd, was from these foals that I imported. And I'm still doing it. Last year, I bought a whole lot of fillies from the latest best dam lines to upgrade my breeding stock. And the same with the colts, you know. Today with the latest breeding techniques, you can buy any breeding in the world. It's freely available. You've just got to find it. Obviously, it's been very expensive, but because of the numbers, prices have already come down. So it's still able, you know, it's still possible to go overseas and go and buy the best because of what's available and because of the numbers that are available.
So will you then go and buy these embryos, bring them back to surrogates and breed them, and then those foals will grow up to be breeding stock? They're not for sport. They are determined to be mares in the field.
As far as the mare is concerned, because of the time limit that I've had, because I started breeding so late, you know, I just bred. They never had time to prove themselves as competition horses. Today I have the numbers that I can afford to take some of the better mares and produce them and put them in the sport. Most of the young stock that I've bought so far, I bought as foals because I prefer to see the specimen before I buy it. There's a lot of foals that are being born that looks fantastic on paper, but still are not the quality that you're looking for in terms of the specimen. So ultimately, I think it's still important to select the specific horse that you're looking for. And I think that's where horsemanship comes in. It's very important that you have the ability to identify the potential of a foal and not just buy, because it's something that you can't do over the phone, for instance. You've got to see that foal. You can't even look at it on a video. You've got to actually see it in real life, because there's a big difference. And I think it's very important that that you still buy foals. Therefore, it's going to be more expensive than just go and buy a whole lot of embryos. And, not know.
So, are you saying you might buy foals in, and they grow out in the farm, and they get to the point where you just go, well, that's not the shape and make of a horse that I want to breed with, and so you won't. So there's that huge gamble involved.
Aidan, so far it hasn't been a very big gamble for me. I've been very lucky that most of the foals that I've bought have turned out to be fairly good and very good horses. The mares that I've selected is also, I've been lucky that I've been able to breed fairly good foals out of it. I'm at a stage where I have to select a lot stricter. I've got to be a lot stricter in my selection from now going on because of the numbers. So it's a nice to have to be able to select from numbers, to select the better quality horses. So I have a number of mares that I breed from in Europe. It stands in Belgium. That gives me access to some of the better stallions that we can't import to Summerhill. And then I bring those foals in every year, produce them here, and most of those foals goes on the auction. In fact, so far all of them have gone on the auction, and that also provides a better quality, or that provides more than just the local bred horses to the potential buyer. And for me, that is important. That I try and have the best horses possible on my auction. Then there's foals that I buy in. Those are foals that I select according to their breeding. Last year I bought a Chaco Blue colt out of a very good dam line. I bought a Balubé de Rouet out of a very good dam line. I bought a Heartbreaker colt out of a very good dam line, and Halifax out of a very good dam line. Those colts I expect to become part of my breeding program in the future. So ultimately, they have to end up in the sport. They have to prove themselves. I currently have a couple of very nice young stallions in the making in terms of sport horses. Nicole rides a few, and I have a few at Summerhill. I have a Cornet Obolensky out of a Chaco Blue mare. I have a Corland out of one of my best mares that I have in Belgium, which is a Cassini mare. The mother of the horse that Bronwyn's got. And those horses all have to be produced. I have a Canan colt out of a Dollard de Muri. He's a full brother to a winner of the World Cup. So ultimately, they all need to go into the sport and prove themselves. And then, only then, will I breed from them, over the long term. Obviously, I do make coverings when they're still young to get their foals on the ground as soon as possible. But they still have to prove themselves in the sport. That would be the idea.
When it comes to your matings and the selection process, what mare will go to what stallion? What is the thinking, the strategy behind it? You mentioned that you keep a finger on the pulse of what's going on overseas, what dam lines are working with what stallions. But is there more to it than that? I mean, we know about line breeding and phenotyping and all sorts of different strategies. Where's your head at when it comes to the mating? Sometimes it could just be a feeling.
Aidan, I think there are very definite characteristics that we're looking for. Ability is the first one. Technique is the second one. Rideability for me is the third one. And then type. A lot of our better horses are still very old-fashioned. And there's something that's not easy to move away from. If you look at the Amanda Semele, he's an old-fashioned horse. If you look at Nabab Darev, he's an old-fashioned horse. But those are still today some of the best stallions that you could have in your breeding. So once you've got the quality in the horse and in your breeding, you then can look at refining what you're doing. But you can't start with type. You end up with type. And that takes time. And you can't lose some of your better qualities by selecting for type from the start. It's a slow process to eventually breed all the old-fashioned types out, and to end up with lighter, more modern-looking horses. Obviously, that is the trend all over the world, and everybody is trying to achieve that, but it doesn't always work. The quality still comes from a lot of these old-fashioned stallions and mares.
When you say old-fashioned, what exactly does that mean? Does that just mean speed? Because old-fashioned still brings the power. Those horses jump big jumps, but the sport has evolved. The distances have changed. The horse has to be very elastic, very rideable. Rideability is key. So I asked this question. I can't remember. Some international rider came out, and for him, he just said old-fashioned was slow. Now they've got to jump. They've got to have that power, but they've got to do it fast. They've got to be able to gallop to those fences.
You're 100% right. If you look at a stallion like Dominator, Dominator is not a modern-looking horse. He's a big horse. He's by the Amanda Semele out of the Casino. And there's been a lot of discussion about Dominator. And we have seen lately what he could do in the sport. He's won major competitions. In other words, he's got sufficient speed, but he looks like an old-fashioned horse. He's big and call it heavy. But when he starts jumping and starts moving, he's everything but slow and heavy. If you compare him to a stallion like Halifax, which is by Heartbreaker, is a far more modern-looking stallion. Lighter, smaller, but still with the ability. But to move away from Dominator and to replace him with something else, it's going to be very difficult, because the power comes from the Amanda Semele and also lies in Casino. And that's what you want in a horse. You want power, and you need speed, you need carefulness, but without scope you can go nowhere, regardless of what your horse looks like. If you haven't got scope, you can forget about it, especially in today's big technical courses. You need all the power in the world to get through it.
We've come so far in the last kind of 20, 30 years with breeding, as the sport has evolved, as we were talking about, the tracks have evolved, the sport has evolved, and it has come down to technicality and time. And the breeding has supported that. So you see horses overseas, and I mean, I just can't see how they could be better than where they are now. So I'm looking, what happens in 10 years? How do we evolve further? I'm talking about the breed overseas. You see horses like Mr. President and Bianca and the one that Ben Mayer rides, Explosion. And I mean, how do we get better than that? What more can be done?
It's very interesting. A very good example is For Pleasure and Shaku Blue. Shaku Blue was called a tractor when he competed. Nobody looked at him. Regardless of what people are saying today, nobody regarded Shaku Blue as a stallion. We all had the opportunity to buy his semen and to breed from him, but nobody did. because nobody recognized him as a stallion that would produce explosion type of horse that we see today. And I mean, a horse like Explosion, 10 years ago, you know, those horses did not exist there. If you look at For Pleasure has been around for how long? If you see what For Pleasure brought to the arena in the last 10 years, the last 5 years, it's unbelievable. Just purely by introducing him to different downlines, different to what he was used to and bred to. So going forward, it would be the same process. I think there will still be improvement going forward, and in 10 years' time, we will look back and say, you know, it's unbelievable what's happened in this period. I look back over 20 years, and if I look at where we come from in the early 2000s to where we are now, in terms of the competition and the technicality, everything's evolved tremendously. But we still have most of those bloodlines in the breeding. Most of them are still there. But they've just been used differently. And they have produced different types of horses. So that is where the challenge lies, for the breeders to identify these different makings.
Yeah, I mean, it is so competitive today. I mean, I was thinking about it, and is it possible to breed a horse that is almost too good? And by saying that, I mean, it's now coming down, the win is determined by hundredths of seconds. These horses are able to gallop to big fences and to jump big fences. And sometimes the better ones just tend to spend a little bit, because they've got such an extravagant technique, such a big bascule up through the wither. They just spend that little bit extra time in the air, and it's the ones that make the time through the air that are determined the winner at the end of the day, because they can all gallop, they can all jump. Is that something that can be addressed in breeding, or is that training?
I think you can't train a horse to be careful. You need careful horses. And when you look at these tracks these days, it's the more careful horse that is actually the better horse, that doesn't spend so much time in the air, that's more economical over the jump. I'm not taking the poles down. And those are the most valuable. You know, if you have scope, you have technique, you need carefulness, and you need rideability. Rideability plays a major role. To allow the rider, you know, to shorten and to lengthen and to turn and to do what he needs to do to get the shortest time. So those are the horses that we're looking for, the ones with the X factor, and those are the ones that will form the nucleus of breeding going forward. For the future.
There is there's a very careful blend in the ultimate show jumper. You need a horse with enough bravery to go to the fences, but enough sensitivity to have respect for the fences. Too much bravery and they have poles here and there. Too much sensitivity and they could put in a stop and back off too much. Are there stallions out there who come with that brand, who bring, so somebody shopping for a stallion might ask, is he brave or is he sensitive? And does that ever influence when you know your mare? So you might say, well, that mare breeds brave horses. She needs a stallion that's going to bring a little bit more sensitivity into the blend. Does that ever come into a breeding equation? Or is it more looking at the performance of what those horses have done? The progeny.
Very much so that the ones with no heart, we know who they are. So it's very important what you say in terms of carefulness. You need a careful horse that is brave. It doesn't help to have a careful horse that is so careful that he refuses to jump. But that's not what we're looking for. We're looking for that braveness, and yes, that is the challenge, is to identify those horses, and we know who they are. You know, if you look at a stallion like Camille Phil, he's little, eh? He's not very big. He's careful. He hasn't got all the scope in the world, but he can get over those fences in no time. So there's an example. That's one of my favorite stallions at the moment, is Camille Phil, in terms of his braveness, his carefulness, his technique, and if you mate him properly to more scope, you can hardly find a better horse in the world.
So you don't worry about size of stallions. I know in the racing game, a lot of good stallions are written off because they are small. Doesn't mean they throw small horses, but a lot of breeders are turned off of them just because of their size. I think Damascus Gate was one of them. In show jumping, is that a factor?
I think you speak to the wrong person when you talk about that, because I like the bigger horses. I don't like small horses. Although today it doesn't matter. It depends on whether the horse has got scope or not, regardless how big he is. Obviously, the smaller the horse, the more maneuverable it is, and the more rideable it is. But it is nice to look at a bigger horse, a bigger stallion. And yeah, we try and keep them as big as we can. Otherwise, you know, they tend to get small very quickly. It's more difficult to breed a proper big horse than it is to breed an average size of a small horse. So it is a challenge, definitely.
But you would use a Camille Phil, you just might put him on a bigger mare.
Camille Phil breeds big, eh? He doesn't necessarily breed small because he's a small stallion. It's not the case with Camille Phil. So yes, you would look for a little bit more scope, because he could do with a little bit more scope. And then because himself is quite small. But it doesn't mean that he breeds small. No, definitely not.
No, he's a genius over a fence. I love watching him. Now, as a commercial breeder, there's also the other component that you've got to look at is the market and who you're breeding for. And as a breeder who wants to breed the ultimate show jumper, what is the ultimate show jumper? He's probably blooded, got the ability to gallop. With that, he probably brings a lot of sensitivity as well. But as a commercial breeder, not everybody can ride that horse. And that's like the Formula One car. Now, if I were to get into a Formula One car, I'd spin it into the wall in 2 seconds. I wouldn't be able to drive it. So does that consideration when you are breeding, who is the market? Who am I selling to? Do I need to breed X amount of amateur type horses that are safe and reliable and will do the job, but may not necessarily be superstars? And then do I need to throw in X amount of superstars that only X percentage of riders, the professional riders, are going to be able to pilot? Or do you just go, I want to breed the ultimate show jumper?
Obviously, we want to breed the ultimate show jumper, Aidan. If you look at the amount of money that's involved in an operation like this, you can't afford to breed for the lower part of the market. You've got to try and breed for the upper part and hope you breed some superstars in the process. So you aim for the best and you end up with what you're actually talking about, with a lot of average horses that are still rideable, could still be ridden by amateurs. Obviously, the majority of our market is an amateur market. But if you don't aim to breed the best, you're going to be developing backwards. So yes, we aim for the best and hope we get a small percentage in the process that we could call top horses that could compete anywhere in the world. But it doesn't always mean that those horses, all of them are difficult horses or unrideable horses, and because that's part of the challenge, is to breed a top horse that's still rideable. And rideability is part of the challenge. Not only scope and technique, but also rideability. Because if you take a horse like Coronado, his biggest what can I call it? The best thing about Coronado is his rideability. You can put an amateur on Coronado and go and jump a 5-star 1 meter 60 track. And that is what makes him such a good horse. And that is what Axel said to me. If he could have Coronados, more Coronados, because those are the easier horses to sell. They're not necessarily going to win all the big classes, but they are there for the biggest part of the market, which is the amateur market, where most of your buyers are, that can buy a horse like that and can enter a big class with confidence and be able to get through a track with 1 or 2 poles down. And ultimately, that's what you want.
Let's talk now about the future. First of all, your vision for the future in terms of your breeding. Some stallions that you've earmarked, perhaps, that you've got your eye on, and how more advanced your breeding you want to go, how close we are to overseas standards. Within that, there is talk. The audit happens, the quarantine opens up, suddenly we can get horses directly into Europe. Is that something that that might feature in your future plans as well, that South Africa could become a breeding ground for horses to be exported, or is that market overseas taken care of and we're never going to break in there?
That's a very attractive subject. We are definitely hoping for a new protocol to get horses out of the country. We do have a lot of inquiries from overseas buyers. Let me go back. If you would go to Europe now to go and find a top horse, you would hardly find it, because those horses are sold very quickly. And there's such a small percentage of horses that are bred that comply with those standards that it's always easy to sell a top horse. It's always easy, very easy to sell a top horse. And I think in future, our top horses would be of the same standard as the top horses in Europe, because we are acquiring everything that is needed to breed a top horse. Why would we not breed a top horse? So going forward, definitely, especially now that we have access to the better dam lines, it would in the future we would definitely be able to breed any quality horse in the world. Our only handicap is our export protocol, where we had to go through Mauritius in the past. So as soon as the quarantine opens in Cape Town and we have a new protocol, obviously it would be a lot more attractive for a foreign buyer to come and look here. And the thing that plays the biggest role is the value of the rand. If you look at our exchange rate, Dirk was saying to me a week ago, I had him on the phone, and we were talking about the value of the rand, and he said a year ago when he was here, he paid 13 euros for a steak. And that was a joke. Now imagine what he's going to pay for a steak now when he comes. For a foreigner to come to South Africa. Cost them nothing. So to come and buy a horse here, pay the export cost, would still be very attractive. Especially, if you talk about the better horses. Obviously, it's going to be a small percentage, but yes, it's something that we're looking forward to. We have the ability to do that.
Stallions. So in racing, and I'll go back to racing because you've bought Summerhill Stud. I'm expecting you to go into racing to learn a little bit more about it, to breed some racehorses. But I'm talking in stallions in racing, it goes by percentages. So winners to runners percentages determines the success of a stallion very early on in its career. Sport horse is very, very different. It's a numbers game. So you'll get your stallion index is determined by how many performance of top rated horses in the ring. But do you think that some stallions perhaps are overrated because of that? Because it comes down to a numbers game, that horses who are getting 2,000 mares a season are always going to have the good ones and perhaps are a little bit overrated? Do you still have to go with those stallions, or is your eye on other stallions that might actually be better but haven't been given the chances?
It's very important what you're saying. You've got to be careful when you look at the indexes and what determines those positions on the index. You have situations where one horse that's very successful pushes its sire quite high on the index. But we are aware of that. And it's not only about the position on the index. It's about what that stallion actually produces and where that stallion fits in your breeding program. So it's not only about breeding from the top stallions on index, but yes, there are other stallions out there. And then there's young stallions. That's another challenge, is breeding from young stallions. Very few people are prepared to breed from young stallions because it's a risk. They haven't seen what they produce. But on the other hand, if you do breed from young stallions and they work out to be successful, then you're ahead of other breeders in terms of your offspring. But there is such a vast difference between the stallions on the index that you've got to choose very carefully what stallions you use on what mares, and your mares determine that. Mares are different, they've got different qualities. So you've got to find a stallion that actually suits your mare. So it's not like using the Shaku Blue and cover every single mare with Shaku Blue. No, it's looking at your mare. You've got Cassini mare. They're bigger, they're slower, they're heavier. You've got to find blood. You've got to add blood to that. Then you put blood to scope, and you're almost where you want to be. And heartbreaker mares are good mares to breed from, but you've got to find stallions that suit them, that are not so bloody, and that adds more size to the offspring. Because generally heartbreaker mares are small, and they don't breed that big. So there's a lot to think about and to consider when you start using stallions.
Throughout the course of the series, I've asked a lot of riders, the riders of yesteryear and the riders of today as well, whether the thoroughbred still has a part to play in the sport horse arena, whether we can still be competitive on thoroughbreds, or whether we have moved past that and we're now in the era of the warm blood, and it's about the warm blood breed becoming better. Let's talk about that in terms of breeding. Is there still place for thoroughbreds in sport horse breeding, given that they were such a key component many years ago in the warm blood breed, Lady Killer, Cottage Sun, all those that were so strong, or have we moved away?
I think ultimately we've lost the opportunity. We had the better thoroughbreds. They don't exist anymore. If I look at the thoroughbreds on Summerhill, it's all sprinter types. The older stallions, and I spend a lot of time going through the old thoroughbred stallion registers to look at what the older stallions actually looked like. And they were superb horses. They had beautiful conformations. And actually, if you look at the more successful racehorses today, they're still the horses with a better conformation. But the thoroughbred breeders have moved away from those horses because I think they were just too slow. But if we still had those thoroughbreds that we're talking about that were successful in the past, absolutely they would form an ideal part of the breeding. We all find the thoroughbred today in the third and fourth generation in the warm blood breeding. And that's where people want to see them. They don't want to see them as the side of the dam. If we look at quickly, the Kruiskerry comes out of Lodanum there. Now, Lodanum was a thoroughbred, and he was hugely successful. So it's not always correct. I think if we had the better thoroughbred mares these days, I would not hesitate for one moment to use them. Not one moment, because they have exactly what we're looking for, or they have. But they don't.
Would you then go back if you were mating them to the Darko lines, a bit of the old-fashioned bring in the power, or is it not as simple as that?
I think you know, if you look at Eliodor and those type of horses, there's a lot of stallions that you could use on an Eliodor mare. You're not limited just to a certain type of stallion. Obviously, we've got to look at technique. I don't think the thoroughbreds have the best technique in the world, but it won't be such a difficult task to mate them to today's stallions. There are several stallions that would suit them, but we don't have them anymore. They don't exist. Like I said to you earlier on, one of the best horses that I ever bred was Rafika Dor, and he came out of a thoroughbred mare, and you know, he had all the qualities in the world that made him a proper show jumper.
Well, speaking of thoroughbreds, you have, I'm sure everybody knows by now, have acquired a very, very famous piece of ground that for many years has been part and parcel of the Thoroughbred Institution, breeding institution, and that is the very famous Summerhill Stud. Tell me about the acquisition, why, and how, and have you made the move? Are you there? Are you all ensconced, moved in?
It all started with a problem that we have with horse sickness up in the northwest. So I had to move my horses to a safer area where I could run mares and foals in paddocks where they didn't have to stand in stables for most part of the year. And I looked for a long time. I looked everywhere. I looked in the Cape, looked in the Kimberley area. But those areas are very far and out of my way. And the area that made the most sense to me was the Midlands in Natal. And I've looked for the last 4 years for the necessary farm. And eventually, you know, I ended up in last year approaching the new horse sickness season, and I had to take a decision what I do. And I was lucky enough to be able to acquire Summerhill, which of course has been a racehorse stud, and also that came with it was Hartford House. Is one of the well-known guest houses that people have been to. It's a beautiful place. The farm is a beautiful farm. Of course, the thoroughbred industry is new to me. There are about 45 different horse owners that have horses on the farm. My biggest challenge was to get my horses down there, which happened in January. So I tried to get them down there before horse season started, and that was actually a very easy operation. I made use of two two people that are in the transport business, and they did a fantastic job. And I'm very grateful to them that my horses were delivered safely to Summerhill. The Thoroughbreds, as I said, is something new. The challenge to me currently is to have the best facility to accommodate these mares. That is where I'm spending most of my time at the moment, is upgrading paddocks, upgrading pastures, upgrading everything to maintain these horses, so that I can ultimately have the best facility in the country to accommodate mares. There are some stallions that are standing there currently. They will be there for the future, and people will be welcome to have the mares on Summerhill. Hopefully, when lockdown is over, I will get to meet most of these owners, which I haven't up until now because of our situation. But yeah, hopefully that will happen in the near future.
And Henning, tell me the branding, because Summerhill was obviously a huge brand. It was probably the boutique stud, the showpiece stud in South Africa. Mick Goss ran a showpiece along with Hartford House. They had the Maktoum School of Excellence, the Stallion Day once a year. A huge showcase, very famous. Is Summerhill ceased to exist and is now Capital, or is it still Summerhill in association with Capital? How's the collaboration? Will there still be racehorses, thoroughbreds bred on the farm, or is it now solely warm bloods? Are you getting interested in racing?
I'm very much interested in racing, but I don't. It's dangerous what I know. So I haven't acquired any thoroughbred mares yet, but I do plan to do that in future. The warm bloods are separate from the thoroughbreds. The thoroughbreds will carry on to exist on the farm. Breeding will carry on as normal. Nothing is going to change. Nothing. It will be Summerhill Equestria. So it will consist of warm bloods as well as thoroughbreds. And everybody that were there in the past, in terms of the staff, are still there. These are very, very capable people, and they will take care of the thoroughbreds going forward. The School of Excellence will carry on. It's quite an exciting operation. We plan to expand that, to incorporate the warm bloods into that. Because of the thoroughbreds, they are limited to live coverings and things like that. And with the warm bloods being there now, they will have the opportunity to learn about artificial insemination, embryo transfers, and things like that. That is not part of the thoroughbred program that they follow.
Now, I'm sure Mick took you for a tour around the farm, as he loves to do, and point out the history. And did he give you the whole history of the farm about the Ellis family and Mowgli and Sentinel and the July winners that were trained off the farm, and tell you about the herringbone track that was put in and how many July winners were trained off that track? Because it's a wonderful facility. I mean, you've got everything you could possibly need there, except maybe an arena.
Mick Goss is the man with the golden tongue, eh? So
we all know it. Yeah,
I had to listen to that about 4 times, so I know all about it. Aiden. Summerhill, I visited Summerhill about 3 or 4 times before I bought it, so I was very much aware of the farm and the facilities. It's as I said earlier on, it's the most beautiful place. There are a lot of challenges, but it's not a problem. We will overcome them, and ultimately we will develop the best facility possible for any person that wants to accommodate his horses there.
So you have Summerhill as the base, as the breeding ground. you are still based at Hekput, and the indoor is there, and the sales ground is there. How long will that arrangement continue? How will it work? Will the horses, when they're yearlings or 2-year-olds, be sent up to Hekput to be produced for the sale? How is it all going to be working for the foreseeable future?
So the main breeding operation will take place at Summerhill. Foals will stay there until they're 4 years old. They will be back down there, and then they will become out. They will be coming up as 4-year-olds to be produced and presented at the auction here. Now, this facility it's a facility that I built recently, and it's ideal. It's ideally situated. It's close to Joburg. People enjoy coming out to this event, so I don't foresee that it would change in the near future. It will remain like this, and obviously, I would ultimately want to build a facility down at Summerhill eventually in later years to come. But for the time being, the horses will be produced here in the Northwest, and the auction will take place at this venue.
I'm sure Mick has also told you about his world-famous stallion days that used to happen on the Sunday after the July. We haven't had them for a few years. I've had the privilege of being down there many times. So anything like that you might introduce to the farm, a stallion day perhaps, to get people used to Summerhill as an introductory before sales maybe? Let people scout about the farm, see what you're up to?
Aidan, those stallion days, I've heard from people. I've never attended one of those days, but it's something that everybody enjoys. And the farm lends itself ideally to a visit. People can stay on the farm, they can stay in the area. So it's an ideal location where you can host something like that. And obviously, that would be definitely, we will have open days. I will build a facility down there where we can loose jump horses, where we can show horses, where we can have stallion days, whatever. It would be a sin not to use that property for that purpose, because it's ideal.
Yeah. Exciting times. Let's now talk about the situation that we're in with this pandemic, and we're all locked down. Had a chat to the chaps from Summerhill Stud, and their sale is very much up in the air, not sure what's going to happen, whether it will happen, whether it won't happen. Maybe it happens later in the year, maybe it's a virtual sale, lots of ideas being tossed around. Your sale happens later on in the year. How confident are you that it will happen this year and go ahead as planned on the planned date?
Aidan, we are preparing for a sale in November. Whether it's going to take place or not, it's something that we will learn later in the year. There's still lots of time. The horses are ready. They're in full work. So it's a decision we're going to take later. I will definitely not have an online auction. The event is a highlight for a lot of people in the year. It's something that they enjoy doing, coming out here. A lot of people don't come out here to buy a horse. They come out here to enjoy the day. Therefore, it would be sad, not to have an auction where people can actually attend the event. So if we can't do it in November, we will postpone it. We will do it later. I don't have a problem in doing it later, even if it means that we have to do it a year later. It means that the horses will be more advanced. They will be a year older, or whatever, or 6 months, or whatever time it takes place. So for me, it's not a major threat not being able to have it in November. It's something that we will make that decision when the time is right. But for the time being, we are preparing to have the auction in November if it works out.
Final question before I let you go. Last year's World Cup winner, favourite mare in South Africa, the darling, Chantilly, now in your broodmare band? Or is she going to go back into sport, or is she now breeding? What's the plan with her? Have you got embryos?
Unfortunately, she was flushed once, and I didn't get an embryo, but ultimately that's what she's here for me to be able to take embryos from her. But she's back in the sport, and she will remain in the sport as long as she can handle it. But eventually she will become a broodmare, and over the time that she's in the sport, I will take embryos from her. That only takes place, later in the year.
Yeah. You've had wonderful, wonderful moments in the sport. Don Camarco, four-time Derby winner. Colnado winning as much as he did here, going overseas, campaigning in huge competition overseas under top riders. What out of all those, is it possible for you, your time within the sport is well documented, so we don't need to go back over the whole story, but is there a highlight for you that you can say, well, that was my favorite day in show jumping? And how much pleasure do you get from watching the horses that you've bred on your farm go up through the ranks and campaign in top class competition?
As a breeder, you never part with a horse. They remain the horses that you've bred, regardless who owns them or who rides them. So it's always a pleasure to watch them perform. Obviously, the times that Don Camarco won the Derby, the times that I nearly died of stress, but those were the events. Especially, I think it's the second one that I was there. First one I didn't even go because I didn't even nearly expect him to win the Derby. I was working on the farm when I got the call, and I had to get dressed and very quickly attend the after party. But the same with Colnado. To be part of a horse like that and to watch a horse like that perform at that level, at a global champions tour, I cannot describe to you the feeling. Obviously, it's extremely stressful, but the satisfaction, the joy that you get out of that is unbelievable. And also in the same time, it exposes you to a lot of other things in the sport, which is also enjoyable, like meeting other people and being part of an event like a global champions tour event. It's just unbelievable. And I think that is the most rewarding thing.
Talking about Colnado as a stallion overseas, is he being used much?
No, I don't think he's been used a lot. I don't think he's been really given the opportunity to do a lot of coverings. He traveled a lot between Europe and America, and up until now, no, they haven't used him.
Pity.
Yeah. Well, I don't know the reason why. I still have a lot of his semen, and the semen is very fertile. I use one straw to get a main foal, so I can't see why he should not get mares and foal. I haven't seen one Colnado foal in there, but there are a few, but not a lot.
And final question, I've asked a couple of riders on this series internationally for South African riders to break overseas and for South Africa to have teams, Nations Cups, World Games, that kind of thing. What needs to happen? Touch on that. Your thoughts. How do we make that happen as a collective body, as an equestrian fraternity? What needs to happen? Is it possible that it can even happen? And then from a breeder, how much satisfaction would it give you if you were seeing capital bred horses carrying South African riders in competitions like World Games and the like?
Aidan, that's a very, very important point you're raising there, because that is ultimately that is ultimately the motivation for a rider to keep on competing, and ultimately is that the motivation for a breeder to, to stay involved at the cost that we have in breeding. Obviously, ideally, it would be if we could travel our horses to Europe, compete and come back. That would be the ultimate. We have kept the World Cup series so that our riders are exposed to higher level of jumping. We've made it compulsory that a foreign course designer comes and builds a World Cup qualifier, so that the riders can be exposed to the more technical courses, and that our local course designers are also exposed to international course designers. And that's what it's all about. So the cherry on the cake would be that if we could actually go and compete in Europe, take our horses there, be part of the whole process. It's not that easy. We know it's not that easy, and that we learn from Lisa's experience and other riders. But if we can get our horses in and out without that Mauritius scenario, it would be fantastic. And that would be the ultimate, absolutely.
Would that be the ultimate for you as a breeder, to know, job well done, accomplishment, that's capital bred horses competing with the best in the world? Would that just be the cherry on the top?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think there could be anything in the world more satisfying than that. That would be absolutely ultimate. And as I said earlier on, for our senior riders, especially our senior riders in the country, that would be, I think, the biggest motivation if they are able to do that, go and compete in the rest of the world and come back, not having to go and stay there or live there and all that, but to move there and compete and then come back again.
Yeah. Given that quarantine might open up, and we hope and we pray, it's something that is attainable?
Yes, definitely. Definitely. We're just waiting for the audit, and I don't see why we won't pass that. And then we just have to wait for that we actually given the time that this is actually going to happen. I think we have complied to everything that was done.
Yeah. Well, we keep our fingers crossed. It was already meant to happen, and I'm told that as soon as travel restrictions open up and this pandemic is dealt with, we'll be back. Henning, it's been a great privilege talking to you this evening, and on behalf of myself and to everybody else, thank you once again for everything that you put into our sport, all the support, the breeding, the finances, the sponsorships. Without you, I can't imagine, as I've said before, South African equestrian sports, show jumping in particular, without Capital Stud being involved, without that Capital Stud banner being flown high and proud. So thanks for everything.
Thank you, Aidan, and also thank you for all your time and all the effort that you've put in the series. I'm sure people enjoyed it tremendously. And thanks to all the sponsors out there. Without you, obviously, there wouldn't be a sport.
We'll see you on the other side. See you at the shows. Take care.
Thank you. Good night.